is spinning. Okay, it should be going now.
Yep.
Okay, we're live on YouTube. Hey everybody, welcome to the Spooky Pajama Party. Yay, with Underlined Authors. My name is Raquel Henry. I'm the founder here at Writers Atelier, and I'm so excited to be here with you all today and welcome these wonderful authors. I'm gonna let Amy Christine Parker take it away. After all, we are celebrating the launch of Flight 171. Sorry, I can't multitask, that's why I paused.
Thank you for the introduction, Raquel. And that's true. Yes, we are celebrating the launch, but we're here actually to talk to all of the underlined authors that I've brought along with me for this pajama party. So we're gonna have a spooky time, talk about our spooky books, and give you some insight into our inspirations behind our writing and sort of why we write horror. So I'm gonna have them each introduce themselves to start. So I'll start. I'm Amy Christine Parker, and I am the author of Flight 171, which is my first horror novel. I have written a few thrillers before this, but basically it's about a girl on a plane who confronts a supernatural creature who is looking for a new body to possess, and she wants to possess one of the bodies of the teens that are on board the plane that my main character is on. And she wants the kids to decide who they're going to choose for her to possess before the flight ends or they'll crash the plane. So that's my story. I'm going to hand it over to Diana Rodriguez-Wallach and have her tell you about her book.
Hi, I'm Diana Rodriguez-Wallach. I am the author of Small Town Monsters. This is also my first YA horror, though it is my 7th book overall. So I did some thrillers and contemporary romance before that. Small Town Monsters is also a bit of a possession story. If you like The Conjuring and ever wondered what it would be like to be the daughter of demonologists, that is where the inspiration for Small Town Monsters came from. And evil is spreading through town while her parents are away, and she has to figure out what is happening to her classmate, a boy's mom. So, and it's also got a multicultural angle. You know, the family's Puerto Rican, and so is Max and Vera are both Latinx. So it gives a little bit more diversity into the horror genre, which you don't often see very much.
That's true. And we also have Eva Gibson, and she has a book, a very creepy cover. I love the cover, actually. Frightmares. Why don't you tell us about your book?
My book is Frightmares. This is my 3rd published book in YA, but it is my first horror as well. And it is about a young man named Dave who is spending the summer after his senior year working at a broke-down haunted house attraction in Orlando, Florida. And his summer gets pretty bad right from the start when one of his coworkers turns up in the haunted house, no longer alive. And so then he has to quickly figure out what happened to her before he's next.
Perfect. And then we have Victoria and Faith, who co-wrote Horror Hotel, which also has an amazing cover. All of our covers, I think, our cover designers do a great job.
Hi, we love our cover. We love all your covers too.
Yeah.
Horror Hotel is a book about a group of kids called the Ghost Gang, and they're paranormal investigators. And they go to explore a haunted hotel. Our inspiration came from the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. And it's a hotel very much like that. And they are kind of ghost hunting, and they stumble upon a body. And shenanigans ensue.
And yikes.
Not good.
All right, so that's a little bit about our books. I'm going to launch into some questions for everybody to kind of give you an idea of what each of us are like as horror writers and sort of what our inspirations are. So for everyone, and we can kind of go round robin, so we can start, like we'll do Diana and then Eva and then Victoria and Faith. Why do you write horror? What have you always been interested in writing horror? Is this your first foray into horror? Is it where you're going to stay? Why horror? Why young adult horror?
So for me, young adult horror is the reason I even became an author. So this is sort of like, I always say it may be my seventh book, but it's the first book I've written that I think I would have read as a kid. I like grew up in the 90s. So I was a huge, Christopher Pike fan and, R.L. Stine Fear Street. So that's what I grew up loving, and I devoured those books. And so even from my very first novel, which was contemporary romance, whenever I was asked, who are my greatest literary inspirations, it was never like someone super deep. I didn't even go to Jane Austen. I was always like Christopher Pike. Christopher Pike is my biggest literary influence, So I just love the YA horror genre. I think it makes kids love reading. From going to school events, a lot of teachers will say this is a genre that they kind of push onto reluctant readers, especially boys who may not, naturally gravitate towards a lot of young adult, but they do love the spooky and they love horror and they love things that are fast paced. So I just think it's a super fun genre to read. And I also love the horror genre in general, both adult and young adult gives you the opportunity to say a lot of things about the world around you and society without spoon feeding it or necessarily being overtly political or feminine, like you get to kind of get your views across in a very spooky yet subtle way, but it's there. It's definitely there.
So you're going to watch The Midnight Club, the Christopher
Oh,
Pike?
absolutely. Oh my God. And I love the Fear Street, and triple, I don't know, what do you call three movies that come out at the same time? Like they came out on Netflix and they were amazing. The 1996 one, just the soundtrack alone of the first 5 minutes did me in. I loved it.
Well, and The Midnight Club, the guy who did that, Mike Flanagan, he does Haunting of Hill House and Midnight Mass, which was like my all-time favorite.
Midnight Mass was so amazing. I watched it and I was like, whoever wrote this was an altar boy. It was like, and he was.
Actually,
Rose. Oh, they're great.
yeah, he's my dream director. Like if somebody were ever going to pick up my book for me, that is the man I would want to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Eva, what about you? Why do you write horror?
Well, I actually grew up in a nice parallel, same 90s, Christopher Pike. The books, I would go to the library and get the tall stack, bring them all home, go through them, bring them back, go get them again, go through them again. I would read those until they were falling apart. And then I graduated, of course, into the adult horror. I've always read and loved horror as just a genre. It's my favorite escapist genre. I don't really read a lot of romance. I don't read a lot of historical fiction or anything like that. But I love horror and thriller, just as far as my reading habits go. And my other two books are not. One of them is more of a dark issues contemporary with a lot of romance. And the other is another contemporary with thriller elements and a mystery, but both are less centered on so much horror as this. And I just wanted to finally write something just for fun. I was getting into like reading a lot of horror again. And I said, I would like to try to do this. And I had an idea for the haunted house setting because I grew up also doing community theater and drama. I was a drama kid growing up, as I'm sure many of you or people you knew might be. And I did also do several community theater plays where there was far more drama going on off stage than there was going on stage at any given moment. And things going wrong backstage, things going wrong on the set, people falling over, flubbing their lines, having to play it off, and the show must go on, as the saying goes. And that also held true when we would do our yearly haunted house in the community theater. And you would be screaming until you had no voice. And then you would have to go and like silently scream and have to be scary that way, but you had to keep going. And I think one of the things that draws me into the horror genre itself is whenever you're reading about whatever the character's going through, all they can do is keep going. They have to finish what they started. They either lie down and die, or they forge ahead, they solve the mystery, they save themselves, they save their friends. And those are the only two choices you get in horror. There's very rarely, it's not like the final girl and then the guy who's just been sitting over there doing nothing. It's always the person who never quit and who made the right choices and kept going. And so I liked the idea of exploring that in a fun story where I just get to enjoy writing it.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. Same. Victoria and Faith, what about you guys?
No, we're not.
Oh, we're good. You're not.
So we are huge. So our thing is that we say that if there's not killing or kissing, we don't care. So huge horror fans, huge romance fans. We love both. So it's kind of reflected in our book, actually. I won't spoil anything, but so yes, spooky since like I was probably 5. I spent every library, you guys know we went to the library once a week when we were like in first grade or something. And I would go right to the spooky section, but it was like more for me, it was like the true ghost stories. There was this book that I literally wore out because it was old, but I checked it out probably every week that I could. And I would just read it like obsessively. And then I remember I following my mom around the house and she would call me her shadow because I was scared by the stories. And Faith is also a pretty spooky gal.
I mean, I was a spooky child. So I grew up in a farmhouse in Texas that was haunted. And I ghosts. And it was really scary. And when I was a young child, I had nightmares. I had all that because of what I was seeing when I was not asleep. And I grew up sort of always like very, very intrigued by the concept of what really does happen when it's over. It's not really over, and because clearly things are going on. And that's especially why I'm drawn. Like I was drawn to like writing paranormal, writing about a girl who sees things that nobody else does.
Yes, our main character actually in Bar Hotel is a psychic medium. So we kind of drew on our love of spooky ghosts and psychic and all of that stuff. And I also love a lot of true crime. That's, now it's kind of getting to be a complicated, I'm like, oh, maybe I should stop doing this, but it's getting complicated on Twitter with true crime. But I do a lot of that. So I shouldn't probably admit that now, but I do love that. So I think like that, this book had a lot of our favorite elements of horror in it.
Well, and also slashers. So like my sort of relationship to horror really started with horror movies. And I was obsessed with the slasher movies that came out when I was a teenager and really kind of could not get enough of being like the chase and the fight to survive when someone's trying to kill you with a knife. And so that definitely comes into this story as well.
By the way, you guys mentioned the Midnight Mass.
Yeah,
and
we both watched
obsessed with the Planiverse.
So am I, like completely.
He is incredible. There is nobody that I have seen. That story, there was the depth of that story was just incredible. And just like, I don't know, I don't want to spoil anything for anybody who hasn't seen it, but that was unreal.
And
that was
so
a great storytelling.
smart. It was so smart. Like just
Smart.
the way he twisted the Catholic mass, like, and it was, like you could believe he line by line proved his point and made it make sense. It was so smart.
And some of those speeches, like the things he wrote when he had the girl in the trailer talking about forgiveness. Oh, like chills as a writer. I'm like, if I could ever write something as beautiful as that, it was just gorgeous.
I'm like chills. I'm almost like crying. Like
Yes.
I'm like a person
It's so
who cries,
emotional.
like really
The
hard.
ending, I was like, there are just a few stories like TV shows like that have absolutely wrecked me, and that show wrecked me. Like it was scary, but it also just so emotional. How does he do it? I don't know.
I love
That was my experience with Haunting of Hill House, is I thought that scared the crap out of me. And I'm desensitized to many horror movies. Like I can watch a lot of horror movies and not just have like the fun jump scares. Haunting of Hill House, I was lying awake at night at my advanced age, looking around the room, going, okay, that was just a show. It's just a show. I'm only on episode 3. It's fine. And then I get further into it. And the brilliance of that is the way it mirrors the family. And it's the family that's haunted, not the house. And it's like a wonderful metaphor.
Well,
It's
hands down,
so
the best
scary.
jump scare ever. Best jump scare ever. Like, you get to the episode, you know, and I have never jumped so hard in my life. Great episode. And the bent neck lady, like, will forever be one of my favorites.
So creepy. So
Oh,
creepy.
so good.
Especially 'cause, like, that's a little girl who's seeing it and she's literally seeing herself. When that, oh shit, I'm sorry, spoiler.
It's been out a while. So fair. It's been years.
It has been out a while.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's true.
I was like so moved by that. As a child who was spooky and literally was like, nobody else could see what I was saying was existing. I was like vindicated.
Yeah.
I really enjoy you referring to yourself as a child who was spooky. I love it. I love the fact that you're a spooky child. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
everyone thinks of us that way, though. If you think about it, like, I know my kids are always like, "You're so weird." Like, I talk about things and I'll get so excited about the way I'm murdering this person. You don't even know. Like, it's so cool. And I go through this whole thing and they're like, the weirdest part is that you're smiling like really big the whole time you're talking about this. You're like, super unsettling, Mom.
They're like, it's good that you write because we don't know what else you could do.
See, for me, it bleeds into my kids' writing. So my daughter's 11 and she used to do like some creative writing projects and like submit them for little contests. And they've always been really dark and really scary. And I feel like I've had to send them with like a Post-it note on top, like with what I do for a living. Like, please don't call me. This is not a red flag for concern.
This is my fault in the first place.
That is so true. Because I always think about that now because, you know, things are different with schools and people are more PC because like the first thing I wrote in school was called All Alone. And the cover I drew in my crayon was a woman face down in a pool of blood. I'm like, I can't believe that my teacher wasn't like, something's really wrong.
I wrote a whole scenario. We were supposed to write about kids encountering the law. And I think it was supposed to be like a dare thing or something, or like, you know, the cops are, you know, how would you interact if you were caught doing graffiti? And mine was like, this young girl has just caught her sister being serial murdered. And now she can't find a cop to trust. And the teacher's like, you can't write about this in school. And I'm like, but I'm in 4th grade. Why not? You know? My dad was actually wonderful with that because he's like, what does she mean you can't write it? You did write it. Obviously you can write whatever you want. And I'm like, thanks, man. You know?
Did you guys ever used to take the computer paper and like staple it to make a little book?
Oh, yeah.
Then I would write my first book that I can remember writing like that. I had this character it was all about this creepy lady whose guts were outside of her body.
Oh
And like her just terrorizing everyone with her guts outside of her body. It's like, we were born to do this, y'all.
Yep.
Time. Your head just runs there. Like, my head runs there every time. Every what if, I'm like, what is the worst thing that could happen? That would be amazing. Wouldn't that be interesting? So, it's crazy. So speaking of real life, have you had any real life? I know there are a couple of us who've had haunted house experiences, but do you have anything that has happened to you in real life that was extremely scary or spooky that informs your writing or, you know, made you kind of more interested in horror and sort of writing horror? Anything real life scary for anyone?
I mean, I lived in a house as well. Yeah. So my first house that I lived in when my husband and I got married, we live in Philadelphia, and it was 175 years old, I think. It was built in 1832 at the time, you know, and we moved in and we would make the joke all the time, like, oh, I'm sure it's like haunted, da, 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 like, you know, how we're so cute. And then I had multiple things happen there. It's the only time in my life I've ever sleepwalked. It was in that house, and I did it multiple times, and it was a trinity. So it's like a Philadelphia brick house, like brick and shutters, one room per floor. The kitchen's in the basement. And I would find myself having walked up the spiral stairs to like the TV room, and I would just be sitting there like ramrod straight. And when I would go down to my bedroom, the covers had been peeled back in like a perfect little triangle. Like they weren't like rumpled or tossed. Like I somehow made it up the steps and was just sitting there. And then the most definitive one was this radio. So we were planning our wedding and we bought this CD of piano music, classical music, to like decide what our going down the aisle songs would be. And you know, this was early 2000s, like boombox. Okay. So I put this CD in the boombox. And if any of you remember that, like they had multiple functions. You had to turn it on and then press like radio CD or whatever, and then hit play to get a CD to play. So every morning I would listen to the radio, like Z Morning Zoo, and leave and turn the radio off. So then I'd come home and see the radio had been turned on. It had played, and it had played the CD that was in there. So you're thinking like power surge or like some sort of alarm or anything. And it wasn't that fancy of a boombox. Like it didn't have those features. So then one day I'm home from work and I hear piano music start playing. It's Bach's Air on a G string. And I'm thinking that it's my neighbor across the courtyard. I was like, wow, you know, Vicky's gotten really good. And then I realized, like, you know, the song's coming from inside your house, you know, like full out, run downstairs. The radio's on, it's playing the song. I tell, you know, my soon-to-be husband, he doesn't believe me. He thinks I'm being dramatic. And it keeps happening to me over and over again at various times of the day, at various, you know, parts of work. I'd come home, some days it had played. So then I put in like Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer. It didn't play at all. Like for weeks, it didn't play. I put this piano music back in and it started happening all over again. So then finally it happened once when my husband was home and like changing the bed sheets. The radio just starts playing on a Saturday and he starts booking it up the steps, scared to death. He finally believes me. And one of my friends who is, I don't know, into the spooky, was you need to talk to them. The ghost just wants to be acknowledged. You just need to talk to them. So I came home from work one day, like when my husband wasn't there, so he wouldn't hear me do this. And I'm just like wandering around the house. I'm like, hey, you know, you guys have lived here a lot longer than we have, you know, like I understand this was probably their jam, you know, like this is like Bach's Aaron G string. Like you probably love this song. You can play it as much as you want. I'll leave the CD in there. Just play it 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, like while I'm, you know, play it when I'm at home. And it would play every day while I was at work, and it never played when we were home again. So I would just come home, I would turn the radio on, listen to the Z Morning Zoo, turn it off, and come home and see that the CD had played. And I hope they enjoyed it.
Wow. Wow.
Probably the
Sleepwalking
nicest
story is
Right?
They were really polite. Yeah.
They were polite.
just liked some music. It was fine.
Walked carefully upstairs, you know, never tripped, didn't fall down them. Yeah.
Your story about being up though, walking up those stairs with the covers turned back, dude, chills.
Don't like it. Don't
These
like
are
it.
like cavernous, triangular shaped steps that you would fall down completely sober on a good day, you know, like let alone in your sleep. Like it was crazy.
Oh my gosh.
Who else? Who else has a good one?
So I used to joke that I'm ghost repellent because I would go ghost hunting a lot because I love ghost hunting and like old spooky buildings. And we went to the West Virginia State Penitentiary, and they like it's basically just a rundown building, and you walk around it like in the dark, like and like people had like hard hats with like the light, you know, like the miners' hats or whatever. Like it was really intense ghost hunting, and I remember I was so excited. I was like, I'm going to see a ghost. I'm going to see something, you know, whatever. And there was a cell of a man who had stabbed another inmate a bunch of times. And a bunch of people started gathering because somebody with an EMF reader, it was just going like crazy. And I'm like, now's my shot. Like, I am going to see a ghost. Like, it's going to happen. I'm going to feel something. So I like beelined ahead of everyone. I'm like, I'm going to get in there. And the second I stepped into that cell, it just went boop. It just stopped like going off. And I was like, all right, thanks, buddy. Like, like he was just out of there. And I'm like, do I need like energy healing? Even this ghost is afraid of me. Like, what's going on?
That's kind of an awesome superpower, though. Like, that would be a
Not
cool
bad.
character that repels ghosts.
Yeah.
I mean, I had, you know, so many, like, to the point where growing up, it was like, this is mundane. And as an adult, it's like, this is just what it is. Like, you know, there's a level of acceptance. I joke that I call myself a real estate psychic because I walk into, when we were house hunting in California, I would look at photos online and be like, that house is definitely haunted. Like, I don't know what, like something. So there were a few that I literally would not go to, like go inside of. I was like, absolutely not. Someone died in the carport. Like, and my husband was like, but the price is so low, you know?
That's why.
Yep.
Now we know why.
But as a child, there was, in that farmhouse, there was a, one incident that really stuck out because it was later proven correct. And as when I was little, my parents totally ignored it. But I slept in a room by myself because I have 5 brothers. And I'm the only girl. So I got my own room and didn't want my own room because I was scared. But my closet had the access to the attic in it. And which on its own is quite terrifying. And we hadn't been living there for very long. And I was very young. I was 4, I think, at the time. And I told my parents they were putting me to bed one night, and I was like, there's a man sitting on the shelf in my closet. And they were like, they open, you know, they do what parents do. They open the door and there's no monster, you know, like the whole thing. And I was like, well, there is. You just can't see him. You just can't see him. Yeah. And, you know, and I would continuously bring out, he didn't do anything insane. He literally wouldn't do or say anything. He was just sitting there. And I brought it up so much that it wasn't until many years later, though, when we moved out of the house, that my father finally did look up the history of the house and found out that a man had died by suicide in the closet, and by hanging from the attic access. And I was like, well, of course, I mean, I know. And that's why he was there, you know, and he never moved or anything, which was a comfort. But I have, you know, seen ghosts moving when they're, you know, trying to deal with the fact that they're in between somehow. But yeah, I mean, that was like a startling sort of like, this is actually maybe real. And my parents were kind of like, okay.
Well, you guys are like the yin and yang of each other. Like she repels them and you attract them, right?
Yeah. It's like a good combination.
Yeah, her is very much that way as well. She has to wear the beanies. She can't, you know, they know she can see them. They want to hang out. And you know, Emma is much more, I guess, science.
I'm a natural born skeptic a little bit too. Like I believe in ghosts, but when you tell me a ghost story, I'm like, nah, that's not like that. Like, I mean, your ghost stories, I believe, but like one time when we were touring the Queen Mary, there was a stomach, so it was a growling sound. And my best friend was there. Everybody was like, it's a ghost. And I was like, that was someone's stomach growling. Like I heard they're just hungry because it's 3 a.m. So a little bit of a skeptic.
What about you? Eva, had anything?
Oh, well, I've had several things happen, but I think the scariest and unexplained one I think I will share tonight. I used to work at a shop when I was in my 20s, and it didn't open until 10 a.m. I had a key because I had to get dropped off early. My husband and we were in our 20s and only had one car. And so he would drop me off on his way to work at like 8 a.m, and I would be tired. And so I would go into the lounge area and I'd kind of lie down on the couch because the store didn't open for another 2.5 hours. And I would just go and take a nap. And I started doing that on a regular basis. But after a while, every time I would fall asleep, I would start getting sleep paralysis. I would be unable to move. I would be able to open my eyes and I would see long dark hair hanging over the back of the couch I was on, just enough so it was in my field of vision, and I would feel a tickle on my lower back, like fingernails.
Wow.
And I could not wake up. This happened every time I went to sleep in that room for about a month, until finally I was like, I got to stop taking these naps. Because I would wake myself up and there would be nothing there. Now, I knew for a fact that there was video feed of that room. I did not watch that video feed because I knew that if I saw anything on that video, I would probably die just of a heart attack, and I would have to quit and never come back. And I really, really just didn't want to know. I was really just okay with the fact that it was technical sleep paralysis and it was all in my head, and that was fine. I could live like that. So about a month after I decided to stop going to sleep, when I went to work, I would just go back into my office and I would go just surf the internet until people started coming in and the place was opening, just so I wouldn't go to sleep. I was going on a road trip with a couple of my coworkers for a business thing. And one of them said, do either one of you guys ever get a really weird feeling when you're in the lounge room? And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, I've been seeing weird things out of the corner of my eye. Every time I turn around and I see my reflection in the glass, I see someone with dark hair standing behind me.
No.
And I was like, no, you don't. And she was like, no, I'm serious. I see a weird reflection and it's almost like it's a flash of somebody there and then they're gone again. And I had not told a single living soul, including my own spouse, about the sleep paralysis that I never had before or after in my life, not at home, not in any of the other houses. And some of them were spooky houses. Some of them were like legitimately creepy places. I have only ever had sleep paralysis in that room, on that couch. And it was the same image that my coworker saw in the glass behind her.
I'm totally picturing the girl from The Ring. Every time.
Yeah.
In my head, that's what it
Or
is.
Before the
Grudge.
Ring came out. This was about 10 years before the Ring came out. This was quite some time before that.
Yeah, I
But
could
it
never.
was
I would
the same
never
kind of
fall asleep.
thing. Yeah.
There's no way. After the first time, I would have been like, nope. Like, there's no way.
I'm very stubborn and I'm a big skeptic. So I'm like, I'm tired. I'm going to go to sleep. And then after a while, I was just like, okay, you know what? Maybe this is all in my head, but I don't like it. So I'm going to stop doing this.
You know, it's so funny that we all have experiences. It's like the trauma club, right? Because I was in Philadelphia area, but like out in the suburbs, and we lived in 100-and-something-year-old farmhouse. And you know, those people are like, whoever like goes and lives in these houses that are creepy, like who are these people? That was us. Like that was totally us. That house looked creepy from the day we showed up there, but we rented it out because it was like the only thing available at the time. And literally the view from my bedroom window was a graveyard across the street. Like it was graves, right? And then, but it was the coolest house, like for a kid, because it had a barn in the back and there was actually like a horse-drawn carriage in the barn still, like with velvet cushions in the top. It was like very cool. And then there was a secret passageway in the kitchen, like in the pantry that led upstairs. It was like a secret stairway. So super cool, right? Except whatever was there was creepy, creepy, creepy. So every night I would go to bed, we would hear somebody walking up and down the hall, like just footsteps. But then when I would go to sleep, I would get this overwhelming sense that someone would crouch next to my bed and just glare at me from inches away from my face, just like, I hate you, leave, that kind of thing. And I was in second grade. And I just remember being like, I'm not going to open my eyes because if I see this, same thing. Like if I see it, I can't do this. So I'll just close my eyes until morning and I'm not going to look. So, but every night without fail, like this thing would be next to my bed, like staring at me really close up. And then the attic door was right by my bedroom, and it had like this iron latch that sort of like sunk in like this, but it would like bounce on its hinges, like somebody was pounding on it all the time. Like you'd hear it and there'd be no wind or anything. It would just be like someone was knocking. And one day when I went by, like the door opened on its own. And it was one of those moments where you're like, ooh. And I didn't make any noise. I like just very quietly went in my closet and sat in there. And I'm like, if anything comes around that corner, I have to leave this house. Like I cannot live here. I don't care what happens. I've got to live in the car or whatever it is. But one night, my brother, his bedroom, like there was a door from his bedroom to mine and then went out to the hallway. And he was in kindergarten, so small. And we never like locked our doors. We kept them open. It was like that kind of house. But this one night I woke up to my parents pounding on one of his doors because both doors were closed and locked and they couldn't get in and they couldn't figure out why. And he wouldn't wake up. Like he wasn't responding. He wouldn't answer. So they were getting more and more panicked. And so then I'm on the other door, like we're all pounding on these doors. And my dad's starting to break the door down because he thinks something's really wrong. And then my brother finally wakes up like utterly confused, has no idea what's going on. And when we came into the room, like a whole piece of the plaster wall was on his pillow next to where his head was. Like it come loose from the wall and landed on his bed. And that was the only time like that happened. The other time he was walking out of the barn one day and I looked up and a piece of the siding started to like waver and like came down and literally like came down behind him and just barely missed him. So it was like a running theme for whatever reason. They really didn't like him, but it was extremely creepy. And we would never go to bed alone. Like you would always be like, "Are you tired?" No. And so you wait for the other person. And then we both went to bed at the same time. So then that makes sense. I guess maybe this is what a prerequisite for horror writers. We all have to have some kind of horror trauma in our backgrounds.
You have to believe too. Like you have to believe in it to be able to write about it.
I think, yeah, you do. I think that's true. Or have like an extreme interest. Because I agree, like I'll do the ghost hunting thing too now as an adult to see if I can see anything. And I haven't as an adult, but when I was a kid, I had a couple of experiences for sure. Okay, so getting back to your books, what can you tell us about the evil lurking inside your book? What is something interesting about your monster or your villain that you can tell us without giving us too many spoilery facts? So who wants to go first? Diana, go ahead.
Sure. All right. So in the book, Vera is the child of demonologists. So if you know the Conjuring films, you know, she has the basement full of demonic artifacts in her basement. And the idea came from watching the Conjuring films, which are based on Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were real life demonologists. They did Amityville, they did Annabelle. And I was just watching the film and I saw that they had a daughter. And I was like, wow, did they really have a daughter? They did. And then I just had this idea. I'm like, I wonder like what would happen if like a hurricane hit their house and like everything broke or was like scattered, you know, like full out. So I just sort of like followed that like plot line through, and it kind of like, so that's something that happened like in the past that they haven't fully dealt with, you know, so the evil has been lurking in the town and they haven't fully realized it. And then her parents go away on a case because in the, you know, Conjuring films are often gone and they leave their child at home. And while she's at home, she is confronted by a classmate who thinks there's something gone wrong with his mother. And so there's a little bit of a possession story with his mother, but there's also a lot of cult in there. So I didn't want to do a possession story that was just your typical exorcist Reagan, you know, just one person. Like I wanted it to affect the entire town, more like Stephen King's Derry, Maine in It, where like the whole town in some way or another was affected by this evil. And so then she slowly starts to realize that the self-help group that's modeled a little like Nexium, if you guys followed that group, it's kind of like a cult where they were like they were doing good deeds in the community and like no one joins a cult, and like here like there was like this underlying like sex thing going on there and stuff. So it sort of starts off like that. There's this horrible tragedy in the town's past, and it kind of opens up the whole town to grief. They're grieving people who died in this horrible accident years past. And so when the self-help group comes to town, and they think it's a way to deal with their grief. So there's a lot of kind of imagining if you were at your lowest point and you did lose somebody, or you're about to lose somebody, and you say up that prayer of, I would do anything, absolutely anything if this doesn't happen. Just make this not happen. And what if you found out that that prayer was being answered, but not by the good place? Would you still make that deal? And what if all the people in the town would be harmed, but your loved one would be spared and would be okay? Would you make the deal? And it's sort of like, so I wanted to sort of like show the evil, but also show this choice and how it isn't always black and white. You know, the choices that why they join a cult isn't black and white. They're not crazy, you know, and why you would make this choice isn't as clear cut when you actually know everything about it.
Like really cool. I read it and I loved it. I thought it was great. And especially the creepy smiling, everybody's like, that's great, everything's good. And then the one that got me was the mom in the nightgown.
Yes.
So,
She's a classic exorcism, because that's my scariest movie ever, is The Exorcist. That it, like, you know, Reagan, The Exorcist, the head spinning. I mean, if you were raised Catholic, it doesn't get any scarier than that. So like Max's mom is the full out, like my ode to Reagan. Yeah.
I think if you're any kind of religion, because I was like, my parents were evangelical, like Christian, and
Mhm.
dude, I saw that movie and slept with the Bible under my pillow for like a week. I was like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have watched that. So, Victoria Faith, what about you? What's your
So I'm really bad about telling this about the bad person or the bad thing in the book without. So we're just gonna talk about the hotel. I'm afraid of giving away spoilers. I'm terrible about that. I'm a blabbermouth. So the hotel. So it's called Hearst Hotel in the book. It's very inspired by the Cecil Hotel. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Cecil Hotel. There was a lot of episodes of various things that have the Cecil Hotel. So there's this documentary on Netflix. There's other things that you can find about it. But when I first moved to LA, the story of Elisa Lam, it just rocked my world. Like, I just thought she was such an interesting person. And what happened to her was so tragic. And so I just, there was like a scene with her in an elevator that I just thought was just like, oh, what was going through her head in that moment? What was happening to her? And it was just haunting. It was haunting to me. I probably watched it like 100 times, this video, which you can still find on YouTube if you want to look it up. But, and then I started exploring like about the Cecil Hotel and sort of what, like all of the dark things that happened there. There were multiple serial killers, including the Night Stalker, who stayed there and did, you know, wild stuff in the hotel rooms, like a lot of like kind of
Sacrifice.
Yeah, like creepy things on the walls, and they found a lot of stuff that was like, you know, satanic. I don't know. And it was just interesting to me. So when we set to, you know, create something for Underlined, we were thinking about that hotel and just how interesting it was, and kind of just landed on this idea, and kind of invented our own sort of ghostly setup with the hotel and things that had happened that were sort of inspired by the Cecil, which was interesting to talk about. You know, when we've been touring and talking about it, it's interesting to actually say, hey, we were inspired by this, you know, place, and you know, what that inspires in the audience for, you know, when they know that it's actually based on a real place. So that's been an interesting, but yeah, I mean, I think that the fact that it's inspired by a real place, and actually our second, we have our Person Cruise is kind of the sequel to this book, and it's its own kind of standalone episode of something of the Ghost Gang series, I guess. But it's also very much based on the Queen Mary, which I don't know if you guys have heard about the Queen Mary, but we love the Queen Mary, and that's docked in Long Beach. It's actually being renovated right now because it's going to sink if they don't do something to it. But we stayed there many times, and so we just like are really enjoying being inspired by real places, and talking about it. I guess I don't know if we should do that as fiction authors. I don't know if we should, but but it's fun to like talk about your inspiration and to really, you know, kind of, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Steal Like an Artist. It's an Austin Kleon little book that's kind of informative with pictures, but talking about like great artists steal. And so we steal from real life relics.
I like to think of it as being like a chef, right? Like it's a bunch of ingredients and you just mix them in a new way. They've something original, but they're all ingredients that existed before you got there. But then you just, you know, you add your flavor.
Yes.
And the horror in the hotel is something that is, because it's not the kind of thing that you can carve out or remove from with renovation. It's sort of like, and when you read Horror Hotel, you really get the sense that it's never going to go anywhere. And I think that is truly terrifying to think about, that there are places that are truly just to their core. Without you know, you can't remove it, and you kind of just have to work with it. And I
like
think that
holding on to energy, you know, that's what I think places actually hold on to energy, and especially when dark things happen in place, it's going to retain that energy, and you never know, like you can't get rid of it.
You can't get rid of it, and I think like the Ghost Gang sort of goes, you know, expecting one thing, and realizing that, you know, they're having to really work with the hotel, the evil in the hotel in all its many forms. And I think that's truly, that was like a lot of fun to play with.
Oh yeah, hugely. I love that idea. But the Cecil always sticks out for me because of the whole water situation. The contaminated water is just the ickiest thing ever.
Yes. That's not in Horror Hotel because that's too close to what it was. But that story is something else.
Yeah. No, every time I stay in a hotel, I think about that. I'm like, oh my gosh, people are drinking the really contaminated water is terrible. And I don't want to give away too much because it's a horrible, horrible situation. But let's just say, like, you know, your water had some deadness in it. That's all. But to have to drink that or shower, I'm just thinking, like, I could not get over that. If that happened to me, I would not get over that.
Yeah.
A lot of trauma from that. I'm sure people had to get some
Therapy.
Yes. Eva, what about you?
Well, unlike my other fellow authors here, my terror is all grounded in reality. I'm as scary as ghosts and demons and everything like that are for me. When I was growing up in Florida, I was growing up in Florida in the 80s and 90s, which is a time of kidnappings and serial murder and just horrible things on the front page of the paper every single day, or in the local news. There was always a kid going missing. There was always, and that has always been the scariest thing to me, is the things that are actually going on in the world around you, and you never know who is going to be involved. You don't know if it's the person next door or the person down the street or one of your friend's parents or somebody you know who knows another person who's actually met this person who does these things, and nobody ever knows until they're caught. And so part of the fear in my book is that the main character is not only having to go into work and be around the people who are his friends and his coworkers and people he's been trusting and hanging out with, and they're all actors. And nobody is who they seem. You just don't know. You never know. It could be somebody you see or talk to every day. It could be one of your best friends. It could be someone you had a fight with. It could be anybody in the world. You never know what's going on in somebody's head or in somebody's heart, no matter what kind of impression they give on the surface. To me, that is the scariest thing, because you never know the truth of somebody until it leaks out.
That's so
So that is where the fear is in mine, is the fear of the unknown right in front of you. And it's a real fear because it's human. It's not a monster. It's not something that can be, you know, exorcised. It's not something that you can throw some salt at and it goes away. Or it's not something that hangs out in the background and just lurks. It's an actual human, and you're a human too. And you have to look into another human's face and never know for sure who you're looking at and who's looking back at you.
So true. Did you ever read I'll Be Gone in the Dark? It's nonfiction.
Yes.
Okay,
I've written quite a few nonfiction true crime books in my time. I've taken college courses on the phenomenon and true crime.
Yeah, for those, I mean, if you haven't read it, I'll Be Gone in the Dark is about a real serial killer, and Patton Oswalt's wife wrote it. But that was the one of the few nonfiction books that I was locking my door every night after I read. I was just so freaked out by the way she wrote it, and the way that because it's so immersive for a nonfiction, that I was that was a time I had some nightmares and some I need to check the doors, because that guy was really twisted. And the fact that he existed and did these things to people blew my mind. But yeah, I agree with you. That can be the scariest thing, because they appear to be like everyone else until they're not, until you know what they've done. Mm-hmm. It's true. And in mine, it's an older lady. What it is an immortal being stuck in a mortal body, and it's failing. So if you've ever watched Drag Me to Hell, and you have an older woman who's aging and all the things that go along with that, and somebody who's actually decomposing almost in real time, this character on my plane, when my character meets the villain, she's knitting and she's singing she's humming church hymns in her seat. And looks like a grandma, and everything is fine. But then after the plane takes off, she acts like she needs to go to the bathroom, and the flight crew makes her sit down. And she reveals a secret about the one flight attendant, and then stabs him brutally with the knitting needles. And this is right away. And so, and then she's just kind of they have to figure out what to do with her. And at that point, that's when she starts revealing who she really is. But that came directly from Stephen King's short story, Grandma. which was about a little boy left alone with his grandmother while his parents are out, and she's just calling for him from the upstairs bedroom, and he doesn't want to go. And I was like, I think 13 when I read that, and I just thought, oh my gosh, I feel like the fear of that. And I think it's because I had a great grandmother who was disabled and she was blind, and she was in a nursing home and she was in a bed, and like she was a large woman and blind, so she would reach to feel you, to see who you were. And when you're like 5 or 6, it's terrifying. It's terrifying to be around somebody who's older like that, who has, you know, these problems and you don't really understand. And Stephen King actually sort of put a voice to that fear for me, because you feel bad voicing it when you're little like that. You know, this is a nice person. You shouldn't be afraid of them, and yet you are. And so I was kind of playing with that with this monster, that idea that like people, you know, you feel bad for feeling afraid of, but you have this instinct that something's wrong. And the fact that older people are, you know, you're confronting death because you can see that they're starting to get closer to that. And that's the fear you're actually dealing with, not necessarily the person. And so that was part of it. But there's definitely body horror in mine, because she's starting to fail. As the plane goes on, it's getting worse.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So now that we're down to like the last 8 minutes, is there anything you want to tell us about any upcoming projects, things that are going to come out after this, something that you can say? I think some of you have announced, I don't know if we all have, but what are you coming up with next? What's on your agenda?
Yeah, so my next book is called Hatchet Girls. It's coming out a year from now, exactly. It's through Delacorte. It's kind of based a little off of Lizzie Borden. So if you know the story of Lizzie Borden Took an Axe, I was just, again, like just sort of like struck, probably watching something. I don't even remember when the idea hit me, but I just wondered, has there been an axe murder in Fall River, Massachusetts since then? And I Googled it and there hasn't been. So I'm like, well, what would happen if a mother and father were axed to death in Fall River, Massachusetts, you know, 100 years later? And so that is like the premise that kicks off the book, is that our main characters, her brother is accused of killing his girlfriend's parents with an axe, and she knows that there's no way he could have possibly done it. And the other point of view is from the girlfriend. And so you know from the very opening chapters, like the chapter 2, that the girlfriend wants to kill her parents, and she's going, and she is possessed, she's affected by some sort of evil, and you don't know what's going on with her. So it's a very unreliable narrator. Is like, she's going to convince her boyfriend to kill her parents tonight. So it's these two timelines of the sister after the fact trying to unravel what really happened that night, and then the night of the murders and what actually happened and how this possibly could have happened. And it was so fun to research, because I got to sleep in Lizzie Borden's house. I went to the Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast. I slept in her house. I got to interview the staff and hear all their ghost stories. And it turns out that Fall River is in this part of New England that's called the Bridgewater Triangle. And it was like named by this cryptozoologist that there's just an abnormally high level of paranormal activity in this triangle. And it can, you know, various ghost sightings and stuff, but, and, you know, Lizzie Borden, all these various murders, a lot of satanic activity from like the Satanic Panic. They have one of the most haunted forests in the world, like if you Condé Nast Traveler, and that's in the book. But a lot of it dates back to the earliest settlers. Like the bloodiest war in American history per capita happened there between the colonists and the Native American tribe that was there at the time. And so that's why they believe that the forest is haunted, the land is haunted, everything is just cursed because of all this blood spilled. So that's sort of one of the things that I talk about in the book that we had mentioned a little earlier, like, do bad things happen because the land is cursed, or is the land cursed because bad things happen there, you know? And so it was super fun to research and super fun to go there. And like everything is based on real places, real everything. So I have like a section at the end called The Truth, where I talk about like my trip and all the actual truth of everything that I said in the book.
That's so cool. I did follow on social media. You're like staying overnight there. I thought that was really interesting. I wouldn't have slept. But did you sleep that night?
I did sleep that night. We were in the maid's room, which is in the attic. So she's very much in like the lore of, did she do it or was she an accomplice? At the very least, everyone believes she had to have been an accomplice, because her and Lizzie were the only ones home. And she claims that she was just sleeping. Like she just slept through 2 axe murders, like, so it's very suspicious. And like, she burned Lizzie's dress the next day. So like the outfit that Lizzie wore that day wasn't available for trial because the maid just was cleaning it in like a spring cleaning kind of way, just burned it in the backyard. So yeah, it was super fun.
It sounds like it.
Recommend it. Yeah.
So, Eva, how about you?
Oh, I have nothing coming up that has been, I'm actually on sub right now, and I'm also working on another manuscript. So I don't have anything coming up that is announceable because it doesn't exist, but I'm hoping that something will pan out in the near future. And either way, the one I'm working on right now is I've gone back into slasher mode. So I'm excited about that. It's like a dark academia mystery.
Ooh,
Yeah.
nice. Great, Faith. I think you have a sequel coming up, or it's like a companion.
Yeah, so we have 2 books coming up. We have it's actually a rom-com coming out in March with Forever called Ellie's Cool Now. And that was actually our first book deal that we got, but it just took 4 years to come to fruition because it had a whole thing with Wattpad and whatever. The other book is actually with Underlined, and it's called Cursed Cruise, and it's the sequel to this book, Horror Hotel, and it's the Ghost Gang, and it's based on the Queen Mary. It's or not based on, sorry, it's inspired by. You've got to be careful with the language. It's inspired by the Queen Mary, and but if Queen Mary, there's actually a ship called Queen Mary 2 that does do transatlantic cruises. So it's just a very haunted historical ship that they're sailing on, and the ship may or may not be its own version of serial killer because of
things happening.
So we're kind of exploring an actual, what if a place had like murderous instincts, kind of. So yeah, and same same cast of characters, everything, and I think it's going to be really fun and hopefully up the ante, up the stakes a little bit, because when the entire place is like, cursed and haunted, maybe the rest of the Ghost Gang can see some stuff too. Yeah. So they've got their own, they can see some of their own supernatural things going on.
And also trying to solve a cold case murder.
Yes.
So, as well.
That's like for 30, almost 40 years old. Yeah. So, so that's not much to go on, but we're working on it.
Well, that's really cool. I have something, but I can't say all of the details yet, but I can tell you I finished the draft, and it's basic, like right now we're calling it Dead Girl Walking, but the title is transitory, we'll see. But basically it's about a girl who runs a gossip site at a high-end private school in Florida, and she's a scholarship student, and she's got a chip on her shoulder for various reasons from her past, and she runs this TikTok called Reputation Killer. And she's constantly outing kids, and these scandals get worse and worse. And in the beginning of the book, she's posting a scandal that's particularly bad. And the day she posts it, she's confronted with her own brutally murdered ghost in the bathroom in a prom dress. And she realizes prom's in a week, and she's going to get murdered. And she's got to figure out who does it and stop it before it happens. And so that's the next one.
That sounds
That sounds great.
so fun.
Pretty soon. I'm going to need that one.
Yeah, I'm going to read that. Thank you.
So before we go, is there a place that you would like people to stalk you at, or look at for more information about your books or you? Any place?
I just joined TikTok this summer. Like I'm like full out TikTok girl. Like I've got an 11-year-old daughter who's teaching me like all the dances. Like I'm doing them. Like yeah, find me on TikTok, Diana Rodriguez Wallach. I'm sure. Just Google that. Yes, follow me.
Okay.
I'm trying to actually become more active on Instagram, EDM, and I do not have a TikTok. I don't think my own children would forgive me if I was ever doing dances online, but I am on.
Learn the entire Bama Rush dance, like the whole thing.
Oh my God.
And I'm also on Twitter at Eva VB Gibson. And so those are the 2 places online that I will have my updates posted, though right now I am trying to get more into Instagram, into the pictures and everything like that.
Oh, good. Okay, perfect. And you too, Victoria and Faith, what about you? Where should we find you?
We're on Instagram primarily. We do have a Twitter, but we barely tweet. We are mostly Instagram at Victoria X Faith. So
Perfect. And I'm at Amy Christine Parker on TikTok, which I don't really do. I post stuff without my face. So I'm working. I will eventually get there, I think. We'll see. And then Instagram at Amy Christine Parr, drop the KER. Before we go, Raquel, is there a way we can pick one person that's been watching to give our books to? Because I have a stack of our books that I'm ready to give away to one lucky person in the audience. Is there someone we can pick?
Can you see me?
I can see you.
Because I put you all on spotlight, so I didn't know. I'm not quite sure how it works when I start talking. But we can. How do you want to do it? We can have them either like comment in the chat if they want to win, or we can randomly select a name.
Maybe randomly select the name, and then we can get their address, and then I can send it after this.
Okay, because I have my sticky pad here that I can. I'm going to say this though, if you're watching on YouTube, then please put your name in the comments, because I can't see who's watching. I just see the number. So if you want to enter, please put it in the chat and I will enter your name.
And then we can pick afterwards,
so I can
right?
see.
We'll contact the winner if they win after. We could probably do that since we're on live, and that'll give everybody a chance.
Okay, I'm writing down names.
Okay.
Of everybody. Well, I'm assuming you want to enter people on Zoom. If you don't want to enter, then I guess let me know. You can private message me. And then let me just double check here on YouTube. I have to multitask here.
Well, while you're doing that, I have one last question. I've got to ask the Scream classic question, which is, what is your favorite scary movie? So before we go, what is it? What is your favorite?
Are we talking scariest movie or just the one we like the most?
The one you like the most.
Okay.
So
I think the one I like the most, I'm going to go like straight 90s and say Scream. Like, I thought that was so perfect because it was funny and horror, and I love funny horror. I can't pull it off, but like Grady Hendrix's books, like I think those are so awesome. And so it was just so funny that it poked fun at itself and in like the best possible way, and I loved it.
What about you guys? Who else has a favorite?
I mean, I love Scream.
Yeah. So I was part of the voting group for Paranormal Activity to come to my hometown. So I was like at the first screening in like Dayton, Ohio, or since I think it was Cincinnati. And we were in the front row. And so I was terrified. And so that kind of whole experience has made that my absolute favorite horror movie.
And I love Scream because of the same reason. I mean, it's so funny and wonderful, and it was probably the first true horror movie I ever saw. But I also, like, as an adult, I watched Midsommar, and I freaking loved that movie. I've seen it like 5 times. I love it so much that it's a little bit weird. So,
Eva, do you have one?
I have a hard time saying favorite anything, like as far as movies and everything goes, because I'm the kind of person who's like, well, what do you mean? Do you mean the movie I've watched the most? Is it the movie that scared me the most? Is it the movie that I connected with? But I definitely, this is a departure, but the horror movie that I have watched over and over and can watch with my husband over and over, and we just keep loving it and think it's hilarious every time, is Army of Darkness.
Oh,
it hits all the tropes, but it does it in such a way, and you know it's a parody of itself, but it's so consistently funny, and it still hits home every single time. It's just the most fun movie to watch. And I like, when I'm watching horror movies, I like to have fun as well as being scared. So it's like I'm not scared of that movie, but it is a horror movie, and I do love watching it.
yeah, I think that's true. I like the funny ones too. Have you guys seen The Final Girls, the movie?
No.
Okay. This is my one recommendation for all of you. You have to watch this one, especially if you like Scream and you like movies that make fun of themselves. The Final Girls has the girl from the Vampire Diaries in it, the main character, I can't think of her name. and a bunch of people, but it's a total parody on slasher movies. So it's a bunch of kids who, the one girl, the main character, her mom was a scream queen, and she was like one of the big victims in this one like campy 80s horror film. And she goes to the screening of her mom's movie and gets sucked into the movie with her friends. So they're actually pulled into the movie, but it's every bad trope from a horror film, right? So you have the girl who's like oversexed. And at one point in the movie, they're going to bait the serial killer. And they literally the whole time have had her like duct taped oven mitts on her hands so she can't take her clothes off. Because that's all she wants to do, right? And she's going to die. So they're trying to save her life. And so she's got these oven mitts on and they were like protected. And they're going to bait him in. And so they literally like, okay, unleash her. So they rip off the oven mitts. They start playing She's My Cherry Pie. That song.
Oh, no.
And she like does this whole like woo, like does this dance, and it is the funniest thing. But that movie is so good. It's very much in the vein of Scream, but like very campy and silly. And I guarantee you will love it. And that's one of my like go-tos every
There
year.
were 2 Final Girl books that came out in the past year. Grady Hendrix had the Final Girl support group, and then My Heart is a Chainsaw
Yes.
is also
Graham
based
Jones.
on like a girl who's obsessed with Final Girls. It was interesting to see like their brains must have synced up on this, and to see this movie come out all around the same time.
Yeah, check this one out. I guarantee it was like very like people didn't know it got overlooked, but it's so good. I recommend it to everybody because it's like so funny.
That reminds me of Cabin in the Woods, which is another really
I
good-
love Cabin in the
That's
Woods.
like one. I love being scared by horror movies, but I swear the best ones to rewatch are the ones that know what they're doing and just do it perfectly like that.
Self-aware horror. Yeah, it's fun.
That is this. You guys have to see it. Okay, so
Okay,
Raquel,
well,
do we have our winner? Okay.
Deborah M, who's watching on YouTube.
Yay.
So,
Congratulations.
Amy, how do you want Deborah to contact you?
Okay, if she can DM me on Instagram, that's probably the easiest way. So at Amy Christine Parr, P-A-R, DM me there, your address, and I will get it out to you as soon as I hear from you. And if you don't somehow can't get me there, email me at amychristineparker@gmail.com. So either place or both places if you really want to make sure you get it. And I will put it in the mail this weekend. Well, I want to thank you guys for coming and joining me for this party. It was so nice to see everybody in person and talk. I'm so glad we got to. And how much we had in common. I feel like we had our own midnight club today. So it was good to meet you. Thank you so much for coming in. And everybody, please check out their books. And
Good luck with the launch.
yes,
Yes,
thank you.
congratulations.
Yes. All right. Thank you so
In
much.
the chat
Thank
there
you.
with our bookshop, and everybody's books are there in our bookshop.org account. So you just have to click that and you'll see everybody's books.
Yes, and Writers Atelier, by the way, just a short plug, helps writers become better writers. It is a place for support. It's a place for instruction. And I highly, highly recommend Raquel's business because she does such a good job helping writers get better and also helping them get the right mindset in place. So she has a podcast as well. So check it out. All right, I think that's it. We're good. So everybody have a
you,
good
everyone.
Good Halloween.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.